Hi again, everyone. Now I'm going to walk you through the document that you will complete for the bulk of your points associated with the peer-to-peer counseling project. This activity requires that you complete a transcript, an assessment of your work, and also a reflection on your work. Now, the first part of the assignment here requires that you complete this table. And there are pretty detailed directions listed above that describe what needs to be included in each column. So I'm going to kind of go back and forth and walk you through this. You'll see that in the first column, you're going to number each volley. Client statements do not get a number. And most often, each time you speak, it would be considered a new volley, the beginning of a new volley, and you'll number the new statement. There might be some cases where the client sort of interjects with a yeah or an mm-hmm, but you're still moving in the same direction with your statement, your dialogue, and in cases like that, it might still be considered the same volley, so you might have a little bit more back and forth. In the second column, you're going to identify who is speaking by either stating counselor or client. And then in the third column, you're going to type up the exact dialogue that was stated by you and your client based on the recording of the session. And again, you're encouraged to copy and paste from the automatically generated transcript, either through Microsoft Stream, that's the one I was suggesting, or if you use another platform, and that's fine. But again, you do need to edit for accuracy. There will be things that are hard for me to read if you haven't. These transcripts should not be full of spelling errors or words that don't make sense. So please take time for that. Before I get to what belongs in the fourth and fifth columns, I'm just going to quick show you here. So again, you can see the numbers are associated with like counselor statements as opposed to the client statements. And then in the second column, it just identifies who's speaking. And then here you would put specifically what was said. And those first three columns are pretty much just the transcript. Now, the fourth and fifth columns are where things get a little more content specific. In the fourth column, you're going to note the type of counselor response, and you'll use the abbreviations from our Mighty Coding Assessment form. They're all listed in the behavioral count section. If you used multiple response types within one volley or within one counselor statement, in most cases, that'll be a whole volley unto itself, you want to be sure to identify and assess each response type you used. So for instance, if you reflect and then ask a question, you're going to want to include both those codes. Let's say it's a simple reflection, it would be SR and then Q would both be listed in the fourth column. In the fifth column, you are going to identify the effectiveness of each counselor response, either by identifying it's one that you would keep or one that you would revise, and then there is additional information that you need to include as well. So for a response that you would keep, that would mean that you believe it was an effective response that you used, you must identify the evidence that led you to determine that that was an effective response. So I have some examples here. Now, I want to point out that although these examples will say things like, oh, the client responded with change talk, or they clarified, what they meant, that might not always be the case. You can have a really effective reflection, and they might just say, yes, that's totally it, and that's all, and that's also fine. So don't think that if it didn't elicit some breakthrough on the part of your client that it wasn't effective. Those are just some of the types of examples that you might be looking for. But again, any evidence that just clarifies why you believe that this moved the client forward, or it helped your rapport, your understanding of what the client's thinking, the direction of the session maybe was impacted by this. Lots of different reasons that a response could be effective. However, probably more often than not, you are going to have ideas of how you could revise your statements in order to improve upon them. And in some cases, maybe it would just be a tweak. In some cases, it would be a more significant change. And again, don't be overly hard on yourself, but also be sure to recognize where there are opportunities that could be missed. When you're going to revise a statement, or where you would revise a statement, there are two additional pieces of information you're going to provide. First, you're going to explain why you would revise it, and then provide an alternate, more effective response. And I won't read through all of these, but I have 5 different examples of the types of reasons you might utilize. There's certainly many more. These are just examples, but 5 different reasons, and then examples of how you would change those statements accordingly. So for instance, just I'll read off the first example. If your why, if you say, I would revise, so you just say revise, I forgot to ask permission, alternate response, I have some suggestions I can share if you'd like to hear them. So it walks you through all those pieces. So I will just quickly show you. So again, 4th column is where you identify the code. So if it is a reflection, either SR or CR. And then in the 5th column, always, for every time that the counselor says anything, that you said anything as the counselor, you should identify, are you going to keep or revise the statement, and then either explain why you would keep it or explain why you would revise it and provide that more effective response. This is where you'll earn a lot of your points because it demonstrates your understanding of what you're already doing well and also where you have opportunities to improve. And just quickly, I am going to show you a very brief snippet of an example from a student who completed this project in a previous quarter. And this will be available on the course page for you to review. Now, I will tell you that I have streamlined this a little bit, where now you don't need to list the entire, you don't have to list the type of reflection here, and you don't have to identify closed versus open, but you can see that the response type was identified, and then how they explained this was a keeper response, this was a response to revise, and then the alternate response was listed as well. So just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm looking for there. So I would say that's the part of the project that requires the most explanation, but I will just more quickly walk you through the rest because there is a lot. Then you're going to complete a global score assessment of your own counseling using the 4 different components. And for each one, so you'll score yourself using the rubric from that cheat sheet that you were provided with. And then in this final column, provide some evidence. So if you gave yourself a pretty strong score for change talk, just briefly explain why, and then identify some things that you said during the session that cultivated change talk. If you gave yourself a poorer score for it, then you might want to use dialogue from the transcript where maybe you did not pull out the change talk. Maybe when the client said something where you heard a lot of change talk, and then you followed up with a question that took the conversation in a totally different direction instead of cultivating more of that change talk. So those are some things you would do there. The next part of this section, you will complete calculations. If you have questions about how to do any of these, please reach out. Otherwise, you'll utilize the same scores that based on the transcript, how you coded all of your responses, and then how you assessed your global scores. You'll use that to do the calculations. And then finally, for this section, you're going to provide an assessment of the scores. We're in terms of the competency and proficiency for the ones where it's relevant. Was your performance fair? Was it good? Was it in between? Was it less than fair? Was it stronger? I mean, you wouldn't really be higher than good because that's the highest, but, just identify where you fall on that scale. All right, then the next part that does require, I think, a bit of explanation is you're going to generate examples of all the different response types that we've really focused on in this class. So we've got another table. In the first one, in the first column that you need to fill out, this is column 2, you're going to identify an example of each type of counselor response if it was found in the transcript. In that case, you'll use the 3rd column to identify the volley from the transcript where that response appeared, and you'll leave the final column blank. So for instance, well, let's use one that is a positive thing. If you used a digging deep, open-ended question, then here you're going to list what that question was, and then here the volley where it was found. That's just so we can see it in context. For some of these types of responses, we might need to know what the client said in order to determine it. That's more true probably for reflections than questions, but still, that's how that works. And then you would leave this last column blank. Now, for a response type that wasn't used, and that's fine, you're not going to use every single one of these response types, but in that case, you're going to create a response of that type that could have been used, okay? They should be specific to the context of your session with this client. So don't make them totally generic. Identify where it could fit in the conversation, and that's actually, you're going to put that in the final column, where it would fit, so that we can see how that statement fits the response type and how it works into the conversation. So I should just clarify here, if the response type, the example is, am I adherent? Let's say it's a complex reflection. That's a positive thing. Hopefully you'll have lots of different ones, but any complex reflection would be, am I adherent? So if you didn't happen to use that type of reflection, then you're going to want to create one. Now, if the response type is, am I neutral or am I non-adherent, and you didn't use it in your session, you wouldn't necessarily want to add that to the session, especially the am I non-adherent. Like, you wouldn't necessarily want to confront your client. So I'm not going to ask you to say, here's where I would put that into the session, because you wouldn't want to add that to the session. However, you do still need to show that you understand the response type. So you are still going to need to generate a response. I know this is a little overwhelming. I trust that it will make sense once you start doing it. The students have done well with it in the past. So I've kind of set up a reminder here. Column 2, the response type, should always be completed for every single row, okay? For each row, either column 3 or column 4 will be completed, but not both. And if you're talking about, say, confront, this is an am I non-adherent response type. If you didn't confront, then you don't want to add it to the dialogue. You wouldn't hope to add it, so you're just going to put NA in that final column. All right, so again, let's say you didn't persuade in the conversation, then you're going to want to make sure that you come up with your own example that demonstrates that you understand what a persuade response sounds like. And then remember, again, for each type, if you did use it in the transcript, if it was something you said during the session, you'll put it here. If it is an am I adherent response, something that is in line with motivational interviewing strategies, and you didn't use it, then you will put a volley number here where it would fit. Definitely contact me with questions. Also, I'll just point out that at the very end, these are client statements. You're going to look for an example of preparatory change talk and mobilizing change talk. Same process. If they use those types of responses, just pull them straight out of the transcript. And then in this column, the third column, identify what volley they can be found in. And if they didn't use one or both of these types, then you'll show where they could have used that type of change talk and add the volley number where it could fit. All right, the next section asks you to kind of go back and connect to theories related to behavior change. And so you are going to identify the client's stage of change by the end of the session, and that needs to be according to the trans-theoretical model or stages of change. So you'll identify that stage of change, and well, there's some follow-up questions. Make sure you provide an explanation. You are going to relate 3 of the 6 health belief model terms that we talked about back in our first class meeting. You'll discuss how those are relevant to the client session, and again, provide an explanation. Then you'll talk about a SMART Plus goal. If your clients, perhaps with your guidance, did create a SMART Plus goal, perfect, you'll write it out here. If you didn't quite get to a SMART Plus goal, then recraft the goal so that it does fit all the criteria for SMART Plus, and then write that here. And then in the table, identify what each of these letters or the symbol stand for, again, according to the way we use it in our class, and then explain how did your goal meet each of those criteria. And then finally, there are some questions here that I'm asking you to reflect on. First You can choose any two of these question sets, and I've really been specific here that you will want to choose questions that will prompt a detailed response that really demonstrates critical thinking about your performance as a counselor. So, and I've identified it here as well. What I'm looking for here is not just regurgitation of things that you already addressed earlier in the project. You want responses that will provide additional thought or new insight. And again, it's all about quality critical thinking. So for this first one, where you get to choose any two, I've asked you to reflect on either your active listening skills, any of the different 4 processes of motivational interviewing. That's it for this part. So you'll pick any 2 of those. So like, for instance, letter C, often because the assignment requires you to come in basically knowing what you want to work on when you are serving as the client. In a lot of cases, focusing that you don't spend much time on focusing because the client's already pretty focused. That's fine, but this would not be a good question probably for you to address unless the client kept changing focus. Then that might be something where there's a lot of interesting data to unpack. But otherwise, this might not be the best choice. But again, you have 5 different questions, and we'll only pick 2 for that first section. Then everyone will respond to question number 2. And I've drilled down to specifics. Make sure you answer all the components of the question, but basically you're going to explore your use of the 4 micro skills, OARS. And then finally, you will identify your top 2 to 3 most significant takeaway realizations, and also your personal goals for developing your counseling skills as you go forward. And so that'll be the last question that you answer. I do have some specifics here where I want you to submit it as a PDF, how to title the document, that kind of thing. So I will let you spend the time to figure that out. I'm sure you don't need me to read it, but hopefully all of that is pretty clear and will allow you to complete the project successfully. I welcome and encourage any questions that you want to ask be submitted through a response to the announcement where I told you that these documents were posted, so you can put them right on the course page, especially if there are questions that are very broad about the directions, because if you have the question, probably many other students do as well. So posting it on the course page allows me to answer it where everyone can see the response to your question. Thanks, everyone. I look forward to working on you with this project.